On Friday, the 29th of June, 55 biplanes assembled on the home de Havilland runway at Hatfield, North London. The next day, they set off on the greatest ever Tiger Moth air race. First leg, Hatfield to Hucknall for refuelling. Second leg, on to Sunderland to prepare for the long final stage across the border to Strathallan in Scotland. This is the story of the aircraft and aircrew that went on that race, and the biggest worldwide gathering of Tiger Moths since the war. They were there to honour an engine, the tough, reliable Gypsy Major. First produced for the Gypsy Moth, it became a legend, winning almost every race and record. But the Gypsy Moth had its rough edges, and by 1930, de Havilland began designing a more comfortable plane, the Model T of basic trainers, the Tiger Moth. Evolved on borrowed drawings, the whole project looks hit and miss with hindsight. But in 1931, the accidental aircraft went into production as the RAF trainer. No one knew what a masterpiece the Tiger Moth would prove and how affection would grow for the aircraft. With its Gypsy engine, it became the most loved plane in the entire flying world, always capable of holding an audience. Last year, squadron leader David Cyster flew solo to Australia, and there was still romance left in aviation, especially in a Tiger Moth. To operate Tiger Moths, and set off to seal a love affair with biplanes that has lasted 40 years. By mid-morning Friday, over 50 biplanes were airborne, heading north, east, south and west for Hatfield. Perhaps if they'd known what awaited at Hatfield, some of the crews would have turned back. The traditional practiced casualness of moth flying dissolved. The freedom of the individual flying band would have been dangerous with such numbers. By 10:30, the first arrivals began to join the aircraft already assembled the previous day. It was then that the tricky mind of Stuart McKay was shown to be almost unfair. Still reeling from a blustery flight, the competition started immediately. As each aircraft taxied in, the crew was surprised by 3 virtually impossible questions. The results were roguishly foretellable.
Much more interesting.
Excuse me, can I ask you a few questions?
If you must.
Do you know the exact wingspan of a Tiger Moth?
Of a tiger?
Yeah.
Hey, don't insult me. I'm flying a Hornet.
Well, we've asked everybody these questions.
Oh, but I've got it in my. Oh, I mean, this is this. Yes, I'm with you. This is this.
Yeah.
And a clue.
Do you know when the prototype DH-60 Moth first flew?
Haven't a clue.
By what more familiar name is the DH-98 known?
No idea.
It's the mosquito, the wooden...
Oh, I know the mosquito well, but I don't know about that sort of name.
By noon, half the aircraft had arrived. The Swiss, although delayed in France, had enjoyed themselves.
It was fine, yes. We had to spend the night, supplementary night at Reims.
Yes.
And we had a very good bottle of champagne there.
So you're in good form?
Yes, yes.
But for Henry Labouchere, honeymooning in West Indian sunshine, the weeks before the race had been a disaster. It was a disaster. Why?
Yeah. Well, I was in bed with flu the first 3 days, and she was in bed with flu the last 3 days. And that was that.
Not much of a honeymoon.
No.
Not really.
No, it's a lovely place, lovely clear water, and very nice if we're sort of like honeymoons, isn't it?
How about the flying? You missed that on the honeymoon, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, but luckily I had a water bomber. One of these things they used to put fires out. I could watch from the bedroom window, so that sort of kept me quiet for a minute.
As each crew signed on, the rules of the race progressively began to sink in. No way was it the fastest up to Scotland who'd be the winner. It was so much more subtle than that. But no one, apart from the organisers, knew just how cunning it would prove. Certainly not the Royal Navy pilot, Paul Chaplin, more used to flying on Phantoms than biplanes. His main aim was to beat the Air Force in their own skies.
It's not a rivalry, it's sort of friendly hatred, really. And I would think the senior service will come in its normal place.
The Navy's going to win?
Well, there isn't actually an Air Force team competing here today, is
I
there?
think it's really David Cyster versus
well,
you,
he's a civilian with a light blue uniform nowadays, I think. So.
Do you trust her navigation?
Absolutely.
Are you certain about that?
I'm being put into the test here, you know, because everyone knows, really, that he managed to get to Australia perfectly well without navigating.
The navigation
I'm not
required...
quite sure what I'm doing, but...
The navigation required tomorrow is going to be very much more skillful than just aiming at a continent.
Now you're being cheeky.
Now, I gather there's a fair amount of competition between you and the Navy.
The Navy are represented, absolutely, yes. They've got a very, very nice, shiny tiger moth. In fact, it looks very pretty alongside this one.
You're being very diplomatic, David. I gather
well,
it's a bit of a needle
pretty.
match, isn't it? Will you beat the Navy?
I don't know.
Ah.
I don't know. All I can tell you is that poor old Romeo Foxtrot, this tiger moth, has been a long way. And if she's not the fastest tiger moth in the world, and we just have to wait and see.
All day from all over they were coming in. Some were veterans with thousands of hours, others had yet to clock 100. The standard procedure, a quiet circuit to sniff the 20-knot wind, and a gentle approach, trying to decide which side of the concrete to favour. Some left the conclusion a little too late, and the grass a little too early. There were bunches and formations, often held together by hand signals or an Aldis lamp from the controllers. But by mid-afternoon, with 3/4 of the aircraft safely in, the tower was composing itself. The two controllers had landed the most variable and basic collection of biplanes seen for years in Britain, and so far without any tears. Is it a really complicated day today?
It's been complicated enough because of varying landing directions for, the heavier type aircraft on 2-4 and the lighter type aircraft crossing it. That makes a little bit of complication. But also that some aircraft having radio and some not.
Roy, do you prefer the old aircraft?
Well, we do. It's very nostalgic, but it's not so easy to control as you have everybody on radio, radio and radar for that matter.
What have you thought of the landing so far today?
Very good.
Very good indeed, except for one, that you had one dodgy one, didn't we?
We had kangaroos and tanks.
He bounced a bit.
He bounced right, yeah.
There was only one bad one, that was all. And very remarkably good, really.
As the afternoon to evening, thoughts and aircrew turned towards the weather and the supper briefing.
Now I'm going to have to stretch. We're up at Sunderland. You're going to have to make a move out to sea. This is very important to avoid the big area there.
Pilots accustomed to flying by ground maps aren't intimidated by a complex route or test. And the briefing, though serious, was also frivolous. They were told the exact timings expected on the stages, how much fuel they should use, but also how to fly over the nudist camp.
I don't have to go over the details with you.
It all sounded a bit like which service centre's best on the motorway, and gradually I started drifting outside to the aircraft. A field full of sacrifices, each plane worth much more than money. Often born in a heap in some far-off lonely hangar and nurtured slowly through many years of caring. Few Tiger Moth owners are wealthy, easy spenders. Most stretch themselves to fly. Friday evening was the first time to stand back and look. 50 biplanes from all over Europe, a tribute to the romance of one unassuming man. And he was like the father of the bride the night before the wedding. Has it been a good day?
Been a splendid day.
In spite of all the hassles?
Yes, there are always hassles, aren't there, on an event like this? But just look at the turnout, absolutely magnificent.
Is the day finished now? Have
No.
they all arrived?
We're expecting 3 more any minute, coming in from Denmark.
They've been held up, have they?
Yes, there's bad weather on the Channel coast, and we understand they're on their way from Calais through Southend to be with us, which will bring the total to, I think, 55.
And then what? An early night?
I shouldn't think so. Very late night, very early morning, briefing and breakfast in the morning, and then on our way to Scotland, I hope.
Tomorrow? Do you feel it's going to be all right?
I'm sure it's going to be all right, yes. We've got this far. It's going to be all right, yes.
I think I can hear one of those planes now.
Could be. Oh, Gypsy. Gypsy, Gypsy.
It was the Gypsy engine, and the Danes arrived just before dusk, 7.5 hours late. One of the least experienced crews suddenly blew 6 litres of oil flying over farmland near Calais. Such is the kindness of the Tiger Moth that while the others circled overhead, the crippled aircraft came down safely.
We made a landing in a pea field. Then, after half an hour, the police came. 1 more hour, the customs came. Then after some hours, we got it repaired. Filled on some new oil. Then we took off again. We got a clearance.
These planes in the background, they came with you, did they?
Yes.
Is this the complete contingent from Denmark, all 3?
Yes. We are the last from Denmark.
Every plane that set off on the Friday had landed at Hatfield intact. The arrival of the Danes settled the evening gloriously. Are you tired?
No.
No. You're not tired?
Dirty all over. You too.
Looking forward to a bath, I suppose, yeah?
Yes, and warm water. So you see my nails, it's oil.
The overnight wind had blown away everything but the expectancy. There was only one talking point at breakfast, the weather.
Very little change in the overall picture since yesterday evening's briefing, and that is that there's a high to the southwest of the British Isles, which has...
In the south, at least, it would be a cold, blustery day. Overcoats at the end of June. But yes, they would be going. The Marmalade gave way to navigation. The race revolved around 3 basic tests: fuel economy, navigation, and time.
Looking at the winds, we can see...
To an outsider, it all appeared in code. Quarter mils, half mils, maximum drift and glide range. And yet the feeling spread. They could all have done it with the AA guide.
Nicely set out.
Did you mark the house for us or not?
We just put it in, but it's all in the paper.
It's all in the brief anyway.
Each crew on leaving were given an envelope, the navigation paper. The organisers have been crafty and designed a test of diabolical nastiness. For example, sketch the yellow gantry on the river through Selby.
Very neat.
Once outside, the last preparations unfolded. Everything set?
Everything nearly set, yes.
You know that they're saying you're one of the favourites.
Are they really?
Yes.
I don't think I am.
Do you feel that way?
Not at all.
What's your main worry this morning?
Oh, the wind, I think that's what everyone will say. There's a lot of wind on the nose.
It was the wind that gave rise to the clothing, with the temperature at -3 above 2,000 feet.
There we go.
There were those with other priorities, the prize for the best-dressed crew. And the more professional with their weird and wonderful assortment of underwear.
It's thermal wear, they call it.
Contact.
Contact.
Off.
Off.
Contact.
Contact.
A ritual has evolved for starting the engine, which both pilot and crew stick to sacredly. Partly perhaps because the 50-year-old gypsy major tends to please itself.
Fuel on, fuel on. Throttle those. Switch it on. Okay.
All set.
Yeah.
Back switch it on.
What?
Back switch it on.
Yeah. Okay. Contact.
Contact.
Still on.
Still on.
Forward.
One plane a minute in strict regulated order was rather optimistic to expect. All it would take was one rogue aircraft for collapse, and yet it never happened. As the first wave of 18 biplanes prepared to leave, the organisation was not falling apart.
Well, it looked a bit chaotic yesterday, perhaps, but it's really beginning to happen now.
And they're really going off every minute?
Every minute, yep. In approximately the right order.
There must have been something go wrong.
Well, there's a lot of time yet. There's another 40 or 50 aircraft to go.
Still fingers crossed?
Still fingers crossed. All the best.
Okay.
It took 90 minutes for all three waves to leave. The field was left empty. Never again would the home de Havilland runway at Hatfield see so many old-timers. The first important task was to fly round the cross at Stapleford Church. Not on the steeple, but a special white one on the ground, guarded in style by the Royal Observer Corps.
One or two. Did an engine run yesterday. Chinese a bit of engine trouble or something.
There's one right over there, Dad.
Where?
Right over there between those lines.
Hello. Oh, you found it.
Oh, that's the one we plotted earlier on, yes, that's all right.
It's usually their task to warn us of atomic fallout, but on Saturday they were timing and sighting just as they had during the Battle of Britain. With them they had a wartime height and position indicator, signed out of the stores for this special occasion. They didn't in fact use it, but it was a nice touch.
Or NFI.
The aircraft flew over at 1,000 feet. Looking up at the bright sky from ground level, it was almost impossible to verify anything, other than it was a Tiger Moth.
Has he got a white panel behind the roundel? No. Can you see? Yes, he has. Yes, he has, yeah.
For some of them, it wasn't really a race. They were there to consummate a courtship of adoration for their aircraft. Once aloft, there was little to do but tack the headwinds and ponder motives. If this is the outcome of all that preparation, it surely must be important. It's unkind to ask them why the flight. All you can do is witness. A strangely private affair between each pilot and his Tiger Moth to fly together in celebration. According to the handicapper, it was 88 minutes to Hucknall, a cruising speed of 70 knots and 7 gallons per hour. Each minute either way would be 2 points lost, with a similar penalty for overuse of fuel. The wind was not as strong as feared, and nearly all the planes were early at Hucknall. For the more aggressive pilots that did want to win, the battle was not against each other, but facing the ever-changing elements. The best pilot in this kind of race is one who understands every beat of his engine, at harmony with his aircraft, constantly making the small adjustments for optimum revs. The winner wouldn't be an aerobatic throttle bender, more likely a cool professional craftsman. By the end of the second leg to Sunderland, it was apparent that speed was the easiest part of the race, that apart from navigation, fuel had become the major factor. Sunderland Airfield sagged under the numbers. It was impossible to work out who was ahead, the order becoming frustratingly confused. Only one thing was clear. David Cyster and wife Cherry were doing well.
Nice little hops. Nice frequent stops for a cup of coffee.
How's the weather here?
Just, we had one little rain shower south of Hucknall, but apart from that, it's lovely, and I see the wind has gone round now. You've got a slightly easterly wind here, and it's been westerly all the way up. Now, quite strong westerly winds, but no, it's all going very well, thank you.
His major advantages were fuel consumption and tiger moth experience. You can't nurse a biplane all the way to Australia without learning the fine-tuning to keep an engine happy. The Navy pilot, more used to Phantoms, wasn't so sure in his handling and was still feeling for the right touch. Their engine, too, was much older, and though systematically maintained, it lacked the frenzied love of the fanatic. It was heavier than the rest. Naval regulations insisted on 2 parachutes and life jackets, and their plane was drinking fuel like a juggernaut. The Tiger Moth is a wonderfully sturdy aircraft. None younger than 30 years, they were flying up the spine of Britain quicker than intercity. Yet in spite of the plane's reliability, the air crew spent the long final leg peering down at the ground. Where would they glide to if the engine cut out? What was the best height up to Scotland? Each plane had to head out to the sea by the lighthouse at Marsden Bay, but in fact there were numerous lighthouses along that stretch of the coast. Several aircraft went round the wrong tower, much to the bewilderment of the observer corps, again manning their binoculars.
That's Newcastle.
Yellow. Here coming thinking fast now.
This time they had Geordie accents, but the confusion was the same.
Can anybody make out the colour? No, it looks a bit blue, doesn't it? Blue.
Blue.
Yeah, it's a blue in our it.
It's got a bluey tinge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Suddenly, over Scotland, the fear was getting lost. The more brazen navigators say a child could fly across England with major cities, roads and rivers to route by. But in central Scotland, lochs, moors and mountains tend to look alike. There were pilots that waited for the next plane, hanging round, trying to find their way. Just before 3 o'clock, 6 hours after leaving Hatfield, the first Tiger crossed the line at Strathallan. A dull morning in London had become a glorious afternoon in Scotland. Although he wouldn't necessarily be the overall winner, with his perfectly tuned engine and smartly enclosed cockpit, it was Richard Dent from Switzerland.
Absolutely wonderful. The
Just
visibility was marvelous. From York we could see the sea, and when we came up here over the mountains here, the colors were superb. It was absolutely a beautiful flight.
How did it go?
Oh, very nicely. Yeah, lovely flight.
You've caught up quite a few places, haven't you?
Yes, I don't think we'll get any points for being on the right time. I think we went a bit too fast, but
You just couldn't hold back on the throttle, was it?
it was too much temptation.
Papa Mike X-ray.
At this stage, anyway, no one troubled themselves about the placings. All the crews were busy winding down after the journey. Even the Navy had lost concern for the outcome, except perhaps of their rivals. Do you know who won, whether it was the Air Force, a la David Cyster, or you?
Well, he's using something in his fuel, because he's not using as much petrol as we are. I mean, I don't know how he does it.
What, you mean the Navy might not have won?
Well, on things like fuel economy, I'm pretty sure we haven't. But,
you don't care, really, do you?
No.
The Air Force, in fact, were lying down, still recovering from their eve of race maintenance. Everything for them had gone exactly to plan. As the sunny afternoon turned into a crisp evening, the judges began their final tally. Every single aircraft that had left Hatfield safely arrived for sundown at Strathallan. 2 planes had been briefly lost, but put down and eventually found the way. All that was left was the 40-mile coach ride across to St Andrews for the presentation of prizes.
What was your most memorable moment?
Oh, I think I was watching Henry bounce on his landing this morning.
Walking through the lines of moths, there was, I think, about 6 lines of moths. It's something that, I mean, I'll never do again as long as I live, and I'll just never forget it, you know.
Well, can I say 3 different occasions? On the 3 landings I've made when I didn't drop the aircraft in from 10 feet.
I learned one thing, that there is a very good whiskey, which is famous Scotch whiskey. Famous Grouse Scotch whiskey.
The most memorable of this weekend? Yes. I can't answer that question, Bernard. It's been a fantastic weekend. It's exceeded my wildest dreams.
Exhilarated, absolutely marvellous. It's all come true. After just over a year's planning, it's all happened, and people are having their dinner at St Andrews on the day we said they'd have it, after 350 miles of tiger moth and hornet moth flying from Hatfield. It's marvellous.
It's difficult to keep a dinner jacket uncreased in a tiger, so dress was informal. 200 fanatics out of Biggles or scrapbooks dining away their weekend. The Great Tiger Moth Air Race had been a success, the only sadness that it would never again be repeated. Nervous now, the more professional pilots awaited the placings. For over an hour, the minor prizes. Oldest pilot, Air Commodore Wheeler. Spot landing, Roger Steck from Switzerland. And the also-rans in the overall award, like the crew for 24th place.
Overall goes to Lieutenant Paul Chaplin and Lieutenant Commander Frank Cox. Oh, gotta get the phone.
But the real award, the overall champion, was the climax, the most accomplished tiger moth pilot in the world.
And the winner, who takes the Globe Trophy, the magnificent model, a gallon jar of famous Grouse Scotch whisky, and 2 life memberships of the de Havilland Moth Club.
How many lives has he got?
That is a question that may very well be asked in this instance, because the winner is a gentleman who flew last year a tiger moth all the way to Australia, David and Cherry Cyster.